It is both a genuine honor and a great pleasure to be here this morning at the Colombian-American Association. Your president, Robert Gray, along with Linda Calvet and so many others, are doing a super job for which we should all be thankful. For over 70 years now, this organization has been dedicated to promoting and expanding contacts between our two countries, especially in the economic sphere, but also increasingly with respect to politics, to the lasting benefit of everyone involved. It is no exaggeration to say that no other organization has done so much for so long for our bilateral relationship, a relationship whose importance continues only to grow over time. Stretching back to the time of President Simón Bolívar and John Quincy Adams, U.S.-Colombian relations have done more than stood the test of time. In the years immediately following the First World War, when the United States began to assume global prominence and this institution first opened its doors, our two nations began to work together in ways that looked impossible a generation before. President Franklin Roosevelt came to Cartagena in 1934 in the name of the good neighbor, and he and President Santos would later work together on the regional threat posed by fascism, Colombia being the first Latin American nation to break ties with the Axis powers. Together, we helped draft the United Nations Charter in San Francisco, and 5 years later, fought side by side in Korea, Colombia being the only Latin American nation to do so. In the years since, we forged an alliance of progress in the face of the Cold War, and most recently, we have combated the international threat of illegal drugs. Still, the most constant element of our relationship over the years has been economic, which has been given quite a boost since the early 1990s. And yet, as we stand at the cusp of a new century and a new millennium, and as a globalization continues to integrate the world's economy, it is time to modernize and strengthen our economic ties even further, and this is one of my administration's primary goals. If, however, we are to talk of our goals, there cannot be no question that the quest for peace, the search for an honorable end to an armed insurgency that has plagued Colombia for almost 40 years, is of paramount importance. Most of you here today are familiar with Colombia. You have felt the warmth and generosity of our people, witnessed the enormous beauty and variety of our countryside, experienced the vibrancy of our cities, and you understand that our nation is so much more than the misleading stereotypes or what is broadcast on the nightly news. Yes, our problems are big, but let me say that what you have been reading in the newspapers is on the alarming side with respect to the state of affairs in Colombia. Talk of a government in jeopardy, of a nation on the brink of collapse, or of a guerrilla who supposedly controls 40% of our territory, or who is on the edge of Bogota, it's hardly a representation of what is happening in Colombia. I do not intend to minimize our problems, which, like I said, are certainly not small. But information like this is scaring away investors who should not be scared about Colombia. We need their presence and their investment. And both you and I know that, like the very many other multinational companies who today do business in Colombia, they have enough security to come to our country. One of the main reasons I have come to the United States is to present a new and comprehensive Plan Colombia, a four-part strategy aimed at reacting our economy, strengthening our institutions, stepping up the fight against narco-trafficking, and strengthening our civil society and local democracy. No part of the strategy can stand on its own. Each aspect complements each other, and together they should play a definitive role in empowering our institutions to ensure economic, social, and political stability and guaranteeing rights and liberties in Colombia, which is the real and true road to the process and to the peace. First, let me speak about the economy. Our record, until now, had no peer among Latin American nations. Uninterrupted growth for almost 70 years, an investment-grade rating, relative low inflation, a commitment to honor each and every financial obligation, a strong, independent central bank, a stable currency, a tested entrepreneurial spirit, and over $13 billion in foreign investment in the last 5 years alone. Impressive indeed, especially in the light of what we have faced: narco-terrorism, an armed insurgency, and regional crises outside our control. Add to these vast natural resources and still untapped oil, coal, iron ore, nickel, precious and semi-precious metals, timber, and agricultural products, and it becomes no less than outstanding. But even more impressive is what is within our immediate grasp. Already my administration has taken the necessary steps to lead us forward, out of our worst economic crisis in this century, and back to sustained growth and increased prosperity. We are making drastic cuts in public expenditures to counteract a fiscal mismanagement crisis we inherit. I am totally committed to returning Colombia to its traditional state of fiscal solvency by the end of my government in the year 2002, and all forecasts indicated we will do so if we remain vigilant. We have made wide-scale improvements in the ways and means of tax collecting at the national and the local level, and in protecting our banking sector from any unforeseen setbacks. Just recently, we reformed our Constitution to remove the expropriation without indemnity clause that had caused much concern among foreign investors. And we are now working to do the same with respect to the foreign intellectual property. In the past year, we have totally revamped our legislation to attract the oil exploration and oil industry, and we have several large-scale privatization projects, particularly in the energy and telecommunications fields. Another of my government's top priorities is to stimulate export, to double present figures by the year 2002, and give a needed boost to local industry, which in turn will reduce our highest unemployment figures in decades. Yet, we in Colombia can do only so much alone, for in today's globalized economy, nations must work together to stimulate growth and sustain free and fair markets. We continue to move ahead in our negotiation with the United States government to secure a bilateral investment treaty with our largest trading partner. Above all, we are openly and actively seeking the equivalent of the CBI parity, that is, an agreement similar to the Caribbean Basin Initiative, a trade preference act that benefits many of our Caribbean neighbors doing business with the United States. Let me speak frankly. What Colombia seeks is trade, not aid. If we are given parity and access to open and fair markets, then not only we will be able to overcome our present economic difficulties by generating new growth and creating new jobs. Investment in Colombia is about much more than profit. Investment in Colombia is an investment in a strong and stable future, sustained by institutions that drive out violence and criminality and bring in peace and prosperity. Our government has the responsibility, and my administration has the necessary will to make sure that our institutions undergo meaningful reforms that, as a result, will translate into stronger and more open mechanisms of government. This means more than the right to vote. It means active and sustained participation at the local and at the national level. It means giving our institutions the resources to allow them to fulfill their central task to serve the people. It means improving infrastructure in those rural areas that were bypassed by early development. It means an expanded judicial system to ensure every case is heard in an impartial court whose rulings can be adequately enforced. It means the necessary resources for improving education and health services to guarantee that the next generation of Colombians can grow up in an environment of security and peace, able to pursue their dreams. And of course, it means modernizing our armed forces so that they will be better able to defend our territorial integrity and protect and safeguard our citizens' fundamental human rights, and improving our national police force to fight common violence and delinquency and dismantle narco-trafficking operations. As I speak, Colombia's armed forces are waging an effective campaign against all armed irregular groups. It is now recognized that the military setback of recent years have been replaced by the military success of recent months. Under the inspired leadership of the Defense Minister Luis Fernando Ramirez and of General Fernando Tapias, our government is reasserting its control of our national territory. So, increased investment and trade can thus do more than stimulate our economy. With the taxes it generates, it can help provide us with the resources to do what we must be done and rebuild confidence in our society. Yet, when necessary cuts are being made in public expenditures, and when at a cost of $1.5 billion, we are rebuilding our coffee belt that was devastated by an earthquake, we are at a time in our history when we seek assistance from the international community, in particular from the United States and the European Community and the United Nations. Such assistance, targeted at approximately $1.2 billion a year over the next 3 years, will be crucial if we are to achieve the goals set out in the Colombia Plan. The most talked about area will be that of narco-trafficking, and it is here that the support of every nation on every continent is required. No single issue, with the possible exception of protecting our environment, is so clearly one that affects us all and for which we are responsible. As individuals and as a nation, we in Colombia have fought tirelessly against the rising tide of narco-trafficking. Many thousands of our best and brightest judges and journalists, politicians and policemen have paid the highest price in this war, and the world owes them an incalculable debt of gratitude. We resist the terror campaigns of the drug cartels that now lay in ruins. Yet, the narcotics trades, fueled by ever increasing demand among Western nations, has continued its assault in our societies. The cartels of the past has given way to a more fractured and less public industry, making it more difficult to penetrate and break up their operations. Yet, such changes have hardly softened our determination or weakened our resolve. In fact, just last week we launched a new counter-narcotics battalion designed to meet the new nature of the beast head-on in terms of reducing cultivation and accessing and destroying their transportation networks. The world community must also do more. In particular, there must be greater integration with respect to money laundering, which has seeped its way into financial institutions across the globe. There must also be a greater willingness to fight contraband, as multinational corporations, particularly those that sell tobacco, liquor, home appliances, and electronic goods, continue to dump these products, often below wholesale, into the arms of black marketeers that work in consortium with the drug traffickers. And there must be strict and enforceable regulations regarding the sale of precursor chemicals, critical to the processing of cocaine, and which are sold in alarming quantities with no other possible purposes. These chemicals are then dumped into our jungles, into the rainforest, and throughout the Amazon Delta, doing lasting damage to one of the world's great and very fragile ecosystems. It is equally true that as the long-term struggles in Northern Ireland, in Central America, and the Middle East clearly show, if any peace process is to prevail, then the international community must be ready to lend its support. For our own part, we Colombians will continue to do everything in our power, allocating all our available resources with this end in mind. And what we are asking for us is a small percentage, let's say 25 cents on every dollar in assistance. There cannot be denying that a Colombia at peace is in everyone's interest. A Colombia at peace with a government that has reasserted its control over the entirety of its nation territory, with a rural community that has been offered viable alternatives to coca and to poppy cultivation, with access to an open global market economy. Such a Colombia will not only be a major asset to regional and hemispheric growth and stability, but will also be a more effective partner in the fight against narco-trafficking. My government will continue to work tirelessly in the face of the immediate dangers and difficulties, and despite temporary setbacks, we will continue to work at home and overseas for the triumph of peace, for the defeat of the illegal drug trade, for an integrated world economy, and for those values, democracy and the sanctity of human rights which we hold sacred. I welcome your continued support and cooperation along the way. Thank you, and God bless you.
Could you please give us an update regarding the progress of the structural fiscal reforms which require the approval of the legislature and which are of interest to the rating agencies?
Yes, this is something that has been in mind for the rating agencies. We are working, I think that, or I may say that we have two waves of reforms starting my government. The first one was the fiscal reform that we just passed last year in the Congress, the tax to the fiscal transactions, and the reform of the Article 58 of the Constitution, as I said before, banning or taking away of our Constitution the extradition without indemnity that was placed in Article 58 of the Constitution. That's where the first wave of reforms that we approved last year in Congress. This year, starting the 20th of July, the session of Congress of Colombia, we are putting for the study of the Congress, as you're asking in the question, basically 3-4 reforms that are fundamental to manage our fiscal crisis. The pension reform, the decentralization law regarding the resources that we have to allocate to the states and municipalities in Colombia. Those, I think, are the two largest reforms. One of them is already in Congress regarding the resources to decentralize in state and municipalities. In the next week, we hope to send to the Congress the reform of the pensions reform, and we hope that by the end of this year, starting this year, we will have that reform also out of the Congress. And we will be working very hard also in pensions. And the other one, okay, the one states, the pensions reform and the labor reform that we hope also to send to the Congress in the next week, to try to create inside the government and inside the country a legislation that could seek in the future to generate more employment, not looking backward, but looking forward, starting next year, that in the month of March, it started the second half of the term of the Congress. I think there's a full commitment of the country in these reforms. Because as I've said in Colombia, this is not a problem for this government, it's a problem for the next government. So that's why we are committed to work very hard with all the political parties represented in the Congress, and we hope with our majority and with the support of all the parties that we will take very soon out of the Congress these reforms that are fundamental for the management of the fiscal crisis in Colombia. But I'm very optimistic and very positive that these will come out very soon of the Congress.
Thank you.
I think I will start saying that sometimes there's a lot of misinformation in the United States and around the world of the peace process. You have to see that there are many actors in the process. You have the FARC, you have the ELN, you have the vigilantes, or what we call the autodefensas in Colombia, and you have the narco-traffickers. So there are a lot of actors in this process. What is happening with the FARC? As you know, we start a process since the 7th of January of this year. We finished the first part of the process on May 7 of this year, agreeing with the FARC an agenda of 12 points. I think this agenda is the most important step in the peace process in the last 15 or 20 years in Colombia. Even I could say it is the more important step in the whole history of the insurgency war we had in Colombia, because for the first time we have an agenda to start negotiations with the FARC. We signed with Manuel Marulanda in the jungles of Colombia an agreement to have a verification or I might say in English as a company commission of the process. And as I said in Colombia the day I was coming here, we have to understand, and the international community, that there are three important steps in this process regarding what we have been saying about the creation of commissions in the peace process. What we agree with the FARC, as you know, we have what we call a distension zone. What we agree with Marulanda was to create a commission of international, or what we proposed was members of the international community, persons of the international community that agreeing between an agreement between the FARC and the Colombian government, we could appoint them to be as an accompanying commission of the area or the distension zone. What I will try to say is that if there's any problem inside the zone, inside the distension zone, we had some friends that were willing to work trying to clarify if there's any problem inside what we call the distension zone. So that's the first commission that we're planning to agree with the FARC to appoint it as soon as possible so that we could start the negotiation process with the FARC. Until now, the only process we have done with the FARC is agreeing in a dialogue to try to achieve a negotiation. And that's why we hope to start very soon the negotiation process with the FARC. The moment we start the negotiation with the FARC, what we propose is an international commission of countries, friends of the peace process, that could be seated with the FARC and with the government in all these negotiations. It could take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. You have to build peace. It's not an easy way, so it could take a long time, and that's why we are asking, with an agreement between the FARC and the government, to us, country, friends of this process, to be with us in the negotiation process. And the last commission that also we have talked with the FARC is what we have called the verification commission of the agreements on peace. If we achieve peace, those agreements, we need countries also to help us verify that we are going to accept and to put in practice all the agreements that we signed with the FARC. Experiences, Salvador, Guatemala, so we have all these experiences. So that's basically the three ideas that we've been working with the FARC. So we hope that immediately we create a mechanism to establish this accompanying commission of the verification zone. I think that we could start negotiations very fast with the FARC. With the ELN, now it's working hand by hand with the government, and now, last week they had a meeting in Caracas in Venezuela with representatives of the ELN. So what we are expecting of the ELN is that they release, that they will free very soon the people they kidnapped in the kidnap of the airplane in Bucaramanga, or the people they kidnapped in the church in Cali, and the people they kidnapped in Barranquilla. So we hope that these guys will release all these people that they have at this moment kidnapped, and immediately, as I said before, and I have said to them, immediately we could start a negotiation process with the ELN. So we are expecting of a meeting this week in Venezuela again between the civil society and the ELN, and we hope that we could start very soon negotiations with the ELN. So I think that's the stage of the process at this moment. But I'm positive, because I think that we have advanced, as I said, in an agenda, and we hope to start negotiations very soon with the FARC.
Plan to fight against corruption, perhaps one of the greatest generators of violence in the country.
Thank you for that question, because 2 days ago we just showed the first results of the anti-corruption campaign that we have established with the Fiscalía, Procuraduría, and Presidencia de la República. What we did is that we created a special task force with the presidential program against corruption, with the Procurador and the Attorney's Office in Colombia. And we have really done, I think, a very good job for the time that we've been working in corruption. Only in the presidential program that just started, or we implemented like 1 month ago, citizens are calling, or through the internet, denouncing or telling the government what's happening. And right now the results of the presidential program is that we investigate, I think there's like 160 denuncias, callings to the president, telling us that specific problems and corruption. We just judge and sent to jail one of these people that were denounced by the community in a very short time. In 15 days, we investigate and judge, and I think it was the first best example for us. Working with the Procuraduría and the Fiscalía, we create in the last 5 months what we call the public audiences against corruption. The way this program is working is that we go, government, with the Minister of Interior, Minister of Justice, and the presidential program, Procuraduría, Contraloría, and Fiscalía, and we do these public audiences asking the people to go straight and denounce what is happening in their own states. Results. The results is that 4 mayors have been dismissed of their, 4 governors, have been investigated, and now they're putting a party in their jobs. 4 governors of Colombia. More than 15 mayors that have been also put apart in their job. And right now the investigations that Contraloría, Procuraduría, and Fiscalía are moving, if I remember the figures, I think more or less 2,300 mayors are being investigated. More than 4,000 members of the states, and results until now are very good, and we hope really to fight corruption as is one of the goals and purposes of my government. And side by side, we are working in all our public bids with Transparency International. They are giving us support, Transparency, this international institution fighting corruption. So we hope that with Transparency International, in the case, for example, of the open bid that we just opened in telecommunications through the Minister of Communications, it's also a very good signal that with the private sector, with the international community, we are fighting also on hand-by-hand corruption.
We have time for one more question. Last question from Alfredo Riso of JP Morgan. Which economic sectors would you point out as most attractive for foreign investors in the near term?
Okay, I think that starting right now, I think that with the new oil policy in Colombia that we just approved in Congress, I think that's a very important sector for us. It will be very competitive. Also in the mining and the coal sector for us is very important, and we're also going to open the telecommunications sector that I think that there's a very, very big possibility. The PCS license, I think, will be very fast that we're going to open this public bid for this type of license. I think that's also important for Colombia. I think those are this moment, and I think that, as I said before, with the new legislation regarding oil and mining is going to be very, very competitive Colombia, and we hope to really to get a lot of investment in these areas. As I said in my speech, we are very committed. We celebrate only 2 months ago a competitive meeting in Cartagena with very, very good results with the private sector, working with them hand by hand, proposing new ideas. I said our purpose and a goal in Colombia is to double our exports in the next 4 years. It's not going to be easy. We know that we're having trouble, but we're working hand by hand with the government, taking all the measures that we think are the right ones to put back Colombia on the track. But I think basically at this moment, mining and telecommunications and oil are those sectors in we hope to get more investment in our country.